Welcome to Point Blank, brought to you by Fitz Roofing. I'm Brandon Stranger, Sports Map Houston. He is Joel Blink, ESPN 97.5 and 92.5. If you have not already, make sure you hit that subscribe button and hit like on this video as well. Joel, I've heard twice on your show this week that you say you have major concerns with Rafael Stone's knowledge of collegiate basketball players ahead of the draft. The Rockets are vying for one of those top 4 picks, so this is incredibly pertinent. Could you expand on that for our YouTube audience that hasn't heard you talk about this on your show?
Yeah, I mean, I've just heard a lot of rumblings and also in press conference and otherwise that no matter how you try and spin it, that he's just not real up to speed with what's going on in college basketball. Now, he's assured the media that he will be, quote, very prepared for the draft and for free agency. Well, that's your job. You're supposed to be very prepared for both every year, whether you have picks or not, or a top 5 pick or not. Those are the kind of things that really concern me. I have multiple sources that are informing me that it's been all about what's going on the NBA level this season and everything going around the Rockets team itself. When you know that there's a good and better than average chance that you could get a top 5 pick, you have to be prepared for that, and you prepare throughout the season, not just after the season.
I do want to put a qualifier on this. It's not as if GMs don't have scouts that are better informed, right? That's the expectation, is like maybe they're not like, knee deep or even like, neck deep in minutia as far as collegiate players go. But there is at least some sort of familiarity. It would be weird, right, if, let's say, Nick Caserio came out and said, we're going to prepare for the draft. We're going to get up to speed as the draft gets closer. Like, I'm not crazy in that. Like, Nick Caserio would get killed if he said something like that, right?
Absolutely. James Click, same way. You've got to be prepared at all times. Look, I know the scouting staff for the Rockets, and I know that the Jimmy Paulises and the Chuck Hayeses of the world know exactly what they're doing, and they are constantly scouring and looking and researching who are out there and who could possibly be brought in to help the Rockets. But Daryl did the same thing, and Daryl was constantly at Cameron Indoor Stadium, at all the conference tournaments, like all the other general managers are. And I know other general managers that are looking around their shoulder going, who's representing the Rockets? Why isn't Rafael Stone here? And that's a question that fans deserve to want to know too, because of the fact that this is the guy that's pulling the trigger on every pick they're going to make. This is a guy in press conference that has said, Tillman Fertitta is not involved in what I do because I will not be a mouthpiece. Well, and so if he doesn't have a say-so and it's all in your lap, then you better be not just giving us lip service. You better be really well prepared for this draft even before free agency becomes an issue, because you don't have a lot of money to play with. You could have a lot of picks.
I want to touch on something else that he said during a press conference too, and it is in regards to the word tanking. But before we get into that, give us a word from Fitz Roofing.
We love the people at Fitz Roofing. They're loyal to Houstonians, and they take care of you every step of the way. They start by doing free, no-obligation inspections. Whether you need roof work done or repairs around the house or a fence in your backyard, they can take care of you and tell you exactly what they can do for free. They come to you and they tell you what they can do, and that's exactly what you want right now, because you don't want to pay just to have someone come out and tell you that they're going to be too expensive or don't use the right products. Fitz takes care of you every step of the way. It's Fitz Roofing, making a difference one home at a time.
In his press conference following the Oladipo trade and then subsequently in recent interviews, Stone has said repeatedly that the Rockets aren't tanking. But I think most fans would feel better if they thought they were tanking. What say you? Are they not wanting to admit out loud that they're tanking because it's a bad look for the league? Or does Stone really think they're a healthy Eric Gordon away from contending?
Well, I think that there's a couple of things, Brandon, and I heard him do some of these interviews. The one thing I will say as a Rockets fan that you should be encouraged by is that they're for 3.5 quarters in most of these games hanging tough. Phoenix has the best record over the last 2 months in the NBA, and you lost by 3 points. And so that shows you that they have the talent. Now, whether they admit it publicly or not, and that's why they're not, and he's not talking about it, because you can get fined by the NBA if you actually admit you've done what Boston and San Antonio and other franchises have done in the past. You can't admit you're tanking, but you can find find ways to lose late in games, even though you're competitive. And that's the best case scenario. We see all these NBA games recently, 40, 50-point blowout losses. That's not your Rockets anymore. And so that's a good sign. The young talent starting to play better with Porter Jr. and Kenyon Martin and Jayshawn Tate and those kind of guys. So you know that there is some hope for rotational players, and they're playing better basketball. But they can't come out and say that they're tanking or really kind of expound on that, because they're going to get beat up by the league and probably fined.
Even if the Rockets land a #1 pick, I'm very curious about this. Let's say they grab that #1 spot. Is a core of Cade Cunningham, Christian Wood, and Kevin Porter Jr. the foundation of a contender?
It can be. I'm not so sure it's Cade Cunningham. I think that Jalen Suggs might be a better guy. Jalen Suggs is a guy that looks already ready to plug in and play right now. He might not have the jump shot he's going to have in a couple of years, and he might be like Gary Payton and Jason Kidd. It might take a little bit for him to develop it, but he has the athleticism. He more has an NBA body. He's ready to play. Cade Cunningham, I've got some questions about his ticker, his desire to win, and his kind of ability to want to go get the big play at the big moments in games. I think it comes down to Cunningham or Suggs, and either one of those guys is going to be guys that you build around for your near future. And then when you add a Christian Wood, Jayshawn Tate's kind of like your new addition of PJ Tucker. You've got guys that you can plug and play in certain roles as you develop out. KJ Martin is a guy that can be a guy that can fill multiple positions. Porter Jr. is a guy, whether he plays the point or the two, is going to be a part of your future. And then you continue to build from there. You have multiple picks at the end of the draft, too, with the possibilities of adding at least one or two that pan out to be guys in your rotation. That's where you are at this point. You're years away from being competitive, but you can take big steps towards closing that gap to making the playoffs by what you do in this year's draft. That's why it's so vitally important that your general manager know everything about this college draft.
One last thing, and you hit on something, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on it. They are sitting on a haul of draft picks that they got for Harden. What's your gut tell you about what they do with those picks? Are those guys going to turn into actual draft picks for the Rockets, or does Stone just take those and bundle them and try to bring a big name to Houston?
I think that's the play Stone has to make if he's smart, because if you look at the percentages over the years of guys that have been contributors on NBA rosters, the top 5 is obviously where you want to be because the percentages are much higher. Anything after 15, for every time that you're going to get a Greek Freak or a Kawhi Leonard, there's going to be a Patrick Patterson at best. There's going to be a lot of busts at worst. And it goes, as you go down the line into the 20s and 30s in the second round, it gets the percentages go way down. Well, unless you're hoping for some crazy set of injuries and retirements and rash moves by the Nets and the Bucks, the picks that you're going to get from those two teams are going to be late 20s and not going to be guys that are going to be franchise impacting players. They're going to be role players. They're going to be guys that fill out your rotation. So that's what you're looking at unless you can package and deal to move up. That's what Rafael Stone should be exploring, because right now I've heard that they think Kevin Porter Jr. is the next coming of James Harden. What should be a rational line of thinking is, how can I take the assets I have to get better assets that I need? So therefore, if the guys we've rattled off are going to be role players, are going to have starting positions, but aren't going to be the next Russell Westbrook or James Harden, then in order to get those players, you're probably going to have to package those picks and hope that one or more of those higher picks pans out to be the kind of player you're looking for.